All right, Josh, your wife said she's going to vacuum, sweep, mop, put away all the laundry, clean the toilets, and wash all the windows in the house. All she wants you to do is put away these bowls, and then you can spend the rest of the day 3D printing. Wait. Oh, it's that brush for the coffee grinder again. It's always moving away. It should be over there with the coffee grinder. You know what? I bet if I spend my time figuring out how to 3D print a solution to this problem instead of putting these bowls away, my wife will think I'm the greatest. But how? How am I going to solve this trivial inconvenience?
Will he solve the problem that didn't need solved? Stick around and find out.
You don't have to be a professional engineer, a computer programmer, or a product design specialist in order to make some really cool things on your own. Let's learn how to do it together on Just Making It with Josh. Hello from Ohio and welcome. So, did I solve the problem that didn't need solved? Of course I did. And as you'll see, it was actually a really simple and quick solution. All I did was print a little hook here to hang the brush on. I glued that hook to the side of the coffee grinder, and now my brush is never lost. Even better, it was such a simple, quick solution that I still had plenty of time to clean up those counters while it printed, which was really good because my wife was not nearly as impressed with my hook problem-solving skills as I dreamed she would be. Let's get into it and see how we do it. This is another project that's going to have a very short parts list. We'll of course need a 3D printer. I'll be using my Ender 3 V2 over here. And to go in the printer, we'll need a filament of your choice. I'm going to be using Overture's white PLA. Where I'm going to use the hook, there's not going to be any environmental factors to consider. It's not subject to high heat. The brush weighs next to nothing, so it's not going to have a lot of stress put on it. You might want to use a different filament though, depending on your application and the weights that you're going to be put on in your hook. You're also going to need some kind of adhesive substance to attach your finished hook to your finished product. I'm just going to use some super glue as I want this particular application to be permanent. But choose the substance that works best for your project. We're also going to need some kind of measuring device. I'm going to use a micrometer to get the dimensions we'll need for the hook. On the software side, you'll need a 3D design program. I'll be using FreeCad. And of course, don't forget your notebook to help with the planning process. Please note that none of the products in this video have been sponsored in any way. Before starting our designing in FreeCAD, let's do some planning. So, grab your notebook, spend a minute thinking. First off, we need to know a couple of key dimensions from our hook. I'm going to be hanging up this little brush here by that little hole there. As such, we need to know how big that little hole is, so we can make sure that our hook's diameter is small enough to go through the hole without being ridiculously small. Now, the hole on this brush is about 8 millimeters, so I think we're going to go for a hook diameter of about 5 millimeters. Next, I want to figure out how far out the hook should go. So half of the brush is about 18 millimeters wide, so I guess that's about how big I'll make the hook out from the wall. 18 feels about right to me. So let's roughly outline on paper kind of what we want. Now, before we switch over to FreeCAD, we need to think about how we're going to be printing this hook. Now, I'm using an FDM printer. How I orient my hook on the printer bed matters a lot. Look, this hook is really thin, 5 millimeters in diameter. If you have to use supports to print it, it's probably going to break the hook while you're trying to remove those supports. I don't want to orient the hook, obviously, with the hook side down on the printer bed. It wouldn't make sense. It could be tempting to orient the hook with the hook side up and the back down. After all, that would be pretty stable on the bed, and it would maximize that surface nice big rectangle that's touching the build plate. But as you can see, that would leave this hook part here unsupported, which is probably going to lead to a bad print. Instead, I think it would be easiest actually if we orient our hooks on its side. Yeah, that means the hook itself will be touching the build plate, and that's a small area as opposed to the back. But most printers will likely be able to print a hook on its side like this without having to use supports. So when we design it in FreeCAD, we're going to want to design it on its side. With some of that planning out of the way, let's flip over to FreeCAD and knock this out. So once we go into FreeCAD, we can go ahead and start creating our hook. So go to the Part Design Workbench, we'll create a body, and we'll create a sketch on the XY plane. We're going to choose the multi-line tool here, or a polyline, And I always like to start at the origin on this. So make sure we start at the origin. We're going to come across a little ways. We have to just rough out the shape. We don't need to be exact with anything we do at this point. We'll add some constraints in later that will make it a lot more clear. And all we're doing at the moment is actually drawing straight lines. We will add in the curves and things like that using other tools in just a moment. And then we'll come over and grab this origin, and then we'll close our shape. Next, we're going to want to add in our fillets. So we'll come up to grab the fillet tool here. And we'll put those, round off those corners where we want them. So we're going to want one. Try this again here. Here. We'll do another one here. We're going to want to round off the top of this bottom, and this bottom over here. Then we can start adding in some of our constraints. So we know that we want our hook to be about 2 millimeters wide, so we'll add in a horizontal constraint here. And we're going to do Shift R and add a radius constraint of 1 millimeter on that corner. Lastly, we need to make sure that this is constrained horizontally along that x-axis. And then we'll come up and do the exact same thing on the top. So we'll choose that far part over there, do Shift H to add a horizontal length constraint. I'm sorry, we need to come over here and do this one first. We'll add a 1 millimeter constraint on that radius, and then we can do our horizontal constraint here by doing Shift H. Next, we know that we want this far line out here to be a total of 30 millimeters tall. So we'll do Shift V and add a vertical constraint of 30 millimeters to it. Coming down here to the bottom, we want this distance to be, let's go 8 millimeters. That'll give us a little bit of a base. So we'll do Control, grab those two, do V, Shift V, and make that a total of 8 millimeters there. Move that out of the way a little bit. And then we'll go over and add some constraints on some of these corners. So this one on the outside, we need to have it be 5 millimeters. These other three, if you hold down Control, we can select them all at the same time. We're going to have one be 1.5 millimeters. So if you do Shift R, it will give you the option of making all of them have the same radius. We'll go ahead and choose yes, and we'll make that 1.5 millimeters. Now we can add in some distances here. So we know that we want this distance to this to be from there to there, to have a vertical of 5 millimeters. We know that we wanted the distance for our hook to be 18 millimeters. So we'll do Shift H to add a horizontal constraint on that line. And we wanted our hook to be a total of 8 millimeters tall. So if we grab that top one, hold down Control, grab this one here, do Shift, try that again. So grab that, well, unselect and everything. There we go. We'll grab those two, do Shift V, and make that 8 millimeters tall. And then we want this distance across from here to also be 5 millimeters. And with that, our entire sketch is constrained, which means we can go ahead and pad it out. So we'll close this and we'll choose pad, and we want it to be 5 millimeters tall. And then the last thing we need to do is round off all these edges here. So to do that, we'll come over to the part workbench, grab one of those edges, and come up here to this fillet tool. and we need to click on all of those edges that we need. Once we've selected all of our edges, we can come down here. We know that we want it to be mostly round, but if we do exactly half and to put in 2.5, then FreeCad is going to just have problems and it won't work. So when you do something like this, you have to go a little bit under. So we'll go 2.45, and then we'll hit OK. And with that, we have our hook all rounded off all over the place. At this point, we can come back over here, choose our fillet, come up to the mesh design workbench, go meshes and import our mesh. Go meshes and then create mesh from shape. We'll go ahead and choose OK here, and then we're ready to export our mesh. And we'll just call it coffee hook. And now we're ready to go over to Cura or your slicer of choice and get it printed out. Once you're in Cura, we'll go ahead and open up and put our coffee hook on the build plate. One of the things we talked about during the planning stage was the importance of thinking through how to actually design your thing so it will build properly. And as you can see, the very bottom of this is actually touching the build plate. This means that we're going to be able to have decent enough bed adhesion to get this to print, yet still be rounded and not have to deal with supports. With something this thin at 5 millimeters, any supports you use are probably going to end up breaking something, or it's going to just look horrible. So you're not going to need to print this with supports as long as your overhang tests show that you can print something that's generally round like this. My printer's not the greatest. I'm not set up the greatest, and yet I've had no problems printing this. So we're ready to go ahead and slice and hit the print button. Coffee, 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 coffee. Grinding those coffee beans. And there we have it. A simple hook glued to our coffee grinder. You know, this project for me was only marginally about designing and printing a hook for a brush. You know, the whole bit about cleaning and coming across that loose brush did actually happen a couple months back. For me, it was one of those lightning bolt moments when it finally dawned on me that, hey, I got a 3D printer and I can solve my own problems. My original instinct had been to just go out, buy a hook. Those things are dirt cheap, but I didn't think I'd really be able to find one small enough for my coffee brush. And then for whatever reason, that was the moment that it hit me that I could just make my own one of them. And so I did. Now what's great about this hook project is that it's completely customizable. Now that you have the basic concept down and oriented it right on the build plate, you can build bigger hooks or wider hooks or hooks with camel humps in it. It really opens up a number of possibilities in solving your hook related problems. The project also helped me think outside the hook. I've since printed solutions for other broken problems around the house, and in one case I probably saved myself about $100 over buying a replacement part. But that's for another video. If you like this video or you found it helpful, I hope you'll like or subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.